Hey guys, welcome back to Dream Analytica, and this is part 3 of my descent into the unconscious. So here I have the final installment, the final image of my descent into the unconscious. And the reason I say it's the final one is primarily because going into your unconscious takes a lot of focus and energy, and it's very energy consuming. It took a lot of cognitive energy as well. Active imagination, which is the process of having a dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious, is very intense. It is recommended that you only go down there for about 15 minutes because of just how intense the experience is, and as well as the almost inability to distinguish between reality and the unconscious. So the reason why I could only stay down there for so long is because I think if I stayed down there for too long, I would have probably gone crazy. I don't think I would have made it back out of there. Primarily too, because I was doing this alone and I didn't have anyone to pull me back out into reality. So it was a very dangerous thing to do. The way you would want to normally communicate with your unconscious is through dream analysis. Active imagination is a completely different ballgame, and it is not for the faint of heart, let's put it at that. It's for few individuals who have the capacity to understand their psychology to a high degree and are able to have the discernment between reality and not reality, which is the unconscious. With that being said, this image I titled The Holy Grail, in other words, the Philosopher's Stone, primarily because of the feelings and the experiences that I had when I was in that state, and I coined it deep state, when you were in such a deep, almost meditative-like state. But this meditation is not like the yogic or Buddhist meditation. Your mind is not empty. You are in almost a schizophrenic-like state, let's put it at that. There are unconscious contents that bubble to the surface, like I mentioned before in the previous video, where the ego is like essentially a tiny bubble. The boundary layer has almost been dissolved and the unconscious contents bubbles up to the surface into consciousness. So that's what essentially happened. If you followed my journey from part 1 and part 2, you'll see that the forms have gone from chaotic to extremely chaotic, and now this is sort of like the culmination of the experience, or like the goal, or the end of the journey, where you're sort of rewarded for going through what I call hell. The previous image was about the enlightenment, and how enlightenment is not about imagining figures of light, but about making the darkness conscious. That's essentially what I had done with previous drawing, was to shine a light into my unconscious. In essence, that was like going through hell almost. Emotionally speaking and psychologically speaking, it was a descent into hell. And so this was like finally making it out of there. The feelings that I had when I was in the middle of this drawing were just sublime. I remember feeling like sort of a relief, almost a bliss-like state. Like imagine going through hell and then finally reaching the other end. You make it out and you just see the light at the end of the tunnel. You are at the end of the tunnel. That's pretty much what I had experienced. It was like something had come down and pulled me out, like out of the water, and I could finally breathe again, see again. I received a lot of visions, like I did before in the previous drawings, about what psychology meant, like what is the point of doing all of this. And I had tremendous feelings of love and empathy, not just for myself, but for everything, everyone, a deep understanding about suffering, compassion for those who are suffering. I felt whole almost. I do want to also sort of illustrate what happened before this, kind of in between part 2 and this drawing. Was while I was outside drawing part 2, the enlightenment, I actually had this intense download where I had these almost hallucinations, And the hallucination that I got, and I think I'll show a picture of what exactly I saw. So I was out in my garden drawing, and I stood up, and all these feelings just poured into me, all these visions and insights poured into me. And then I had this almost hallucination, this this image of like a Taurus figure and a guy standing in the middle, and all this, it's extremely difficult to explain, but all this energy, this force was like going from the top of this guy's head and then back down and into his feet like a Taurus. I don't want to call it a voice. It's like, if you think like the voice of God, it's not words. It's like a intense feeling, intense knowing. But it essentially said that everything is connected. Everything moves in, moves out, and back in this cycle. And everything, nature, people, the universe, is all connected. It was a very enlightened experience to me. That occurred between the Enlightenment drawing and this drawing. And I just remember that I was out in my garden and I had that vision. I sort of kind of like collapsed because my knees were shaking so bad. And I really felt at the time that I couldn't take it. It was so powerful. It was so like that feeling when you feel connected to everything, like you are one with the universe. It was that feeling. Um, like the words really can't do justice to describe the feeling, but I hope I can convey that it really felt like you were one with everything. Like it really felt similar to like an LSD trip, or maybe I've never taken ayahuasca, but what from the stories I've heard, it's like that. It's like you are connected, and there are voices. Uh, I call them voices, but they're all, honestly, like deep insights and visions about the nature of everything. And remember, this is all based on psychology. This is part of the process of active imagination and the culmination of doing my own dream analysis, my own psychological analysis, my own understanding of my psychological type and cognitive functions and how they work, and how my unconscious function, which has been repressed for so long, finally erupted where I had opened the gates. And more, I don't want to get too much into that again because I made videos about it, but essentially unlocking the anima, or the feminine aspect. And that, in this image, this angel came down and felt like it brought new life into me, new understanding, new hope, new purpose, new meaning, which I think is ultimately what Jungian psychology and individuation is about. Give meaning to the suffering. And I think that's what a lot of people nowadays have lost. There's suffering, but there's no meaning to it. They don't understand why. If you read the book of Job, that probably will explain what I'm talking about. There is meaning to the suffering. And that's what Buddha teaches. I think Jesus as well. I'm not religious in any way, by the way. But from my understanding, what's really cool too is, I'm digressing here, but from my understanding, I think Jesus and Buddha actually went through the same experiences, and Carl Jung. And what I mean by experiences, I'm talking about psychological experiences. So if you take the Bible as more of like a psychological experience, like metaphors or allegories, and treat them sort of like dreams where you interpret the symbols not as literal but as metaphorical. Those are explanations of the journey or the descent into the unconscious. So essentially, Jesus had descended into his unconscious and had these divine experiences. And Jungian psychology is so powerful because it essentially connects the religious experience with a psychological explanation of what had actually happened. And that also ties in with Buddha's experience and Buddha's insight and Buddha's teachings. These are all psychological experiences, not literal. You don't want to take the resurrection as a literal thing. It is more of a metaphor or an allegory for what he had experienced psychologically. If you really read Jung's work, that's what he's trying to get at. He essentially combined the religious experience with a psychological explanation for it. And it's so profound and so much to take that very, very few people actually understand that. I don't claim that I'm one of those people to understand, because I don't fully understand all of his work, but it is my understanding that from what I know and what I experience now, based on my work and my active imagination, that's what I've come to understand is what he's talking about in terms of the religious explanation with the psychological explanation. And it's crazy because that's essentially what dreams are too. Dreams are almost like a religious experience, a divine experience. You can explain that divine experience in a psychological way, in an objective way. That is, to me, extremely powerful because it essentially admits that maybe you won't understand this yet, but I think if you continue studying Carl Jung's work, you will eventually. It's inevitable, but essentially what that means is that God is essentially real. That the divine is actually real. When a person has that divine experience, a lot of, maybe not a lot of the time, but in some instances, it's so much because the divine experience is so perfect. It's so sublime. It's so blissful. They can't return back to the mundane reality that we live in. So they ultimately become so depressed and essentially destroy themselves because they can't return back to this boring shit of life that we live in. But that also explains Buddha taught is like once you have that divine experience, now you're going to have to return back to reality, to the real world, and live your life just as you were before. But now you have the divine experience with you. And how do you live humbly, properly with that experience? It opened up so much insight into psychology, into my own being, into the nature of humanity and civilization. This image is so powerful to me because I didn't draw those pillars of light. I was shining a flashlight, and for some reason the light was doing that. I don't know why. And then it just popped out like that when I took a picture of it. The image too is like the proportion of this stone is so, in my eyes, so perfect. And when I showed family and friends, they loved it. Like they just had this innate feeling of beauty, of essentially like, wow, that is something very special. It evokes such an emotional response in myself and in my family and friends, and that's essentially what the image was to me as well. It's like it was such a divine experience. I'm having so much trouble to put into words because I feel it. Like I can feel it now every time I look at this image. It brings me so much peace and so much comfort. Like something is there's something worth respecting, revering. There's something more than myself. There's something greater. The image is like there's this thing watching over you that is essentially trying to take care of you. As long as you yourself take care of it, which means as long as you take care of yourself, as long as you love yourself, it will love you back. And I think what I'm referencing to it here is the self. When you love the self, it's going to help you. And I spoke to my INTJ friend today, and I told him I had this weird vision last night. If you saw yourself standing in front of you right now, would you hug yourself? And to me, I think in the past I would have such a reversion to it. Like I would feel like, no, I don't think I would. But now I think I would. I would, if I saw myself, I would give him a hug. That image shows you, do you really love yourself? Would you comfort yourself? Um, like you have no problem hugging your spouse or your friend, but when you see an image, when you see yourself, why is there this instinctual like aversion to it? Like it's almost like I don't know. But that was my feeling before, but now it's a lot different. I think I would. And so yeah, so maybe moving towards like trying to tie it together with my understanding of psychology. This, like I said in the previous video, and my ENTJ friend laughs so hard when I say this, and he agrees with me, is Jesus was right. That love is the answer, and love is the answer in psychology, and that's what Jungian psychology aims to do, is to integrate all the aspects of yourself so that you can essentially become holy. Once you do that, the projections stop. You create less hatred in the world and more love, because you yourself love all those parts of yourself. So you essentially stop projecting all that misunderstanding outwardly. That's like the culmination of individuation. When you individuate, you also have this whole newfound perspective on life, like a whole new meaning, a whole new way of seeing the world, the people in it, nature. You understand now that everything is connected, and that if you do harm to one thing, you're doing harm to yourself. And it also gives you a completely new view on death as well, because, and this is from my own understanding, not everyone will agree with it, but in psychological terms, especially if you analyzed enough dreams, you'll understand that death is not actually the end. It's not some black abyss where we fall into absolutely nothing, where it's just, that's it. Consciousness and the unconscious is not bound by the laws of space and time. It transcends that. That's how we have intuition. You know, we're able to see around corners without even actually seeing it. Make really strange predictions too. And that's psychology. That's really coming to understand that it really does not obey the laws of space and time, physical reality. So it transcends that, almost in a different dimension, if you will. And so then you can understand that when you die, you essentially are a drop that returns into the ocean, whatever that ocean is. And then in dreams, that there are people who have dreams when they die that explains that life continues after death through some metaphor in the dream. As long as I get to share the experience, that it is possible to understand your own psychology without having to go to school or without having to have a degree, that it's possible, and that I have personally feel like that there's new meaning again in life. It's done so much for me. It pretty much saved my life. Jungian psychology, Carl Jung, in essence, pretty much saved my life many times. I think it like, as an INTP, like when I was unhealthy, like I pretty much isolate myself from the world. I distrust everything. Now it's brought me so many new people into my life, made so many new connections, reinvigorated my relationships with my family, actually helped, allowed me to help my family psychologically, ending the cycles of trauma that existed in my own family, with the terrible psychological imbalances in my own family, and what we call now as generational trauma. It was terrible. So I'll get a little personal here, but my father ended his life when I was about 13. So it's very scary to have that in the back of your head when you realize that that could be me, could it be genetic or whatever. So that sort of gives you a little bit of insight into why I was so eager to study and understand psychology. And I explained in previous videos too, there are so many fields of psychology. Like, how did you know like which one to pick? Like, there's so many. There's Freudian, there's, you know, there's Nietzsche, there's just so many schools of psychology. Which one do you pick? There's no right one. All I know is that my intuition told me that I should read Jung. I can't explain that. It was like an intuitive feeling, like, just study Jung and you'll be fine. And that's what I did. It gave me personally the Holy Grail, or the Philosopher's Stone, and found new meaning, wholeness, compassion, empathy, understanding, insight, and connection with everything else. So thank you so much for watching, and thank you for sticking around if you followed me throughout the series. I really enjoyed making this video and explaining my experiences in the descent to the unconscious. If you would like to connect with me or reach out or share your dream, I developed a website, www.dreamanalytica.com, where you could share your dream or reach out to me. It's up to you. There's also some information regarding analytical psychology, like the anima and animus. And then I've also developed an application on the App Store, currently only available on the App Store due to the fact that I'm having trouble with Google. But the app is really useful. It's a useful tool to have in your toolkit because it provides information on psychological types. It provides information on everything that I've been trying to teach on this channel, and also has instructions on how to teach you how to analyze your own dreams in a very healthy and safe way. The typology thing is cool because on the fly you have now an app where you could essentially decipher people on the spot and learn on the spot like how to communicate with them, like what their preferences are in how they like communication, how they think, what are their negative aspects, what would trigger them and stuff like that. So it's really useful to have. So go ahead and check that out if you're interested in learning more.